Like most 17-year-olds, Kimberly Coffey could barely wait to graduate high school. Her sights were set on being a nurse, following in her mom's footsteps. But that didn't mean she was wishing away the time. Kimberly had already bought the dress that she would wear to prom and soaked up all of the moments she had left at school with her best friends.
She was that kid that everyone gravitated towards. She was that kid that was the voice of reason for her friends. You know, as a 17-year-old, girls are dramatic. She would put them at ease and say, okay, guys, take it easy. Let's think more clearly about this. And that's just the kind of girl she was. She was the go-to person.
That's Kimberly's mom, Patty Wukovitz. Just a week out from prom, Kimberly came home from school with body aches and a fever of 101.
I gave her ibuprofen, and she was actually fine the rest of that afternoon and into that evening. When we woke up the following morning, the scenario was drastically different. She had told me that everything hurt her, from her eyelashes down to her toes. She couldn't lift her head off the pillow. And I noticed she had purple dots on her ankles, tiny purple dots, which are petechiae. And I saw those purple dots get larger and turn into a purplish rash, which I saw right before my eyes go up her legs.
Petechiae is caused by bleeding under the skin and looks like a rash, but isn't itchy. Though it can be caused by a simple strain or injury, it can often be a sign of a more serious condition. Wukovitz thought her daughter may have caught a bloodstream infection and rushed her to the emergency room.
The pediatric intensivist in the emergency room told me that she suspected Kimberly had bacterial meningitis and that it had actually infected her blood. And I was so shocked because I told the doctor it can't be bacterial meningitis. My daughter received the meningitis vaccine at 11 and at 16. So maybe it's something else. And that's when the doctor explained to me that the vaccine Kim did receive, which most other kids have as well, only protected her against serogroups A, C, W, and Y, and didn't protect her against serogroup B, also known as meningitis B.
Meningitis B is a rare and deadly bacterial infection. Unfortunately, since the symptoms are often similar to the flu, it's hard to recognize and diagnose early. The disease progresses quickly, and any wasted time could be the difference between life and death. After being rushed to the emergency room, things quickly went downhill, and Kimberly died a few days later. She was buried in the prom dress she never got a chance to wear, 3 days before the high school graduation she would never attend. Though a vaccine for types A, C, W, and Y was approved in 2005, the first vaccine for meningitis B wasn't cleared until 2014, 2 years too late for Kimberly.
So it's relatively new compared to the meningitis that covers the other 4 strains. That's been around for a while. The big difference is a lot of the schools in the different states mandate the meningitis, they just call it meningitis vaccine for school attendance. And it's given at the first dose at 11 to 12 years of age, and the second dose is given after 15 years old. And that's because the vaccines, while they're really terrific vaccines, they don't last that long. And while the children are still at risk because of their behaviors, we want to get them other doses into them.
That's Mary Koslop-Petracco, a pediatric nurse practitioner. Meningitis vaccines are recommended for teens and adults at increased risk. Since meningitis is mainly spread through saliva, increased risk includes sexually risky behavior, living in dorm rooms, and sharing food and drink. However, the meningitis B vaccine still isn't mandatory for high school and college students. Instead, it's recommended under what's known as shared decision-making, which is when physicians and patients work together to decide if the kid's behavior warrants getting the vaccine. However, Koslop-Petracco says most kids are putting themselves at risk.
No matter what school the children go to, where they're going to school, if they're going to go to school, they all have the same behavior. The behavior is sharing saliva. They share all kinds of things. They share water bottles. They share food. I caught 2 adolescents sharing a wad of chewing gum once. So we need to protect them from themselves by protecting them against these behaviors that they have.
And they also have to know that meningococcal meningitis is not just a college disease. It affects, at the most high risk, 16 to 23 years old and infants under 1. But there are also all of those kids that don't go to college. They have to be protected. They're doing the same behaviors. They're sharing saliva all the time. It's what they do.
And with cases of this disease on the rise, the high-risk populations aren't the only ones who should be concerned. Last year reported the highest number of cases since 2014, and 2024 is on pace to exceed those numbers. The groups that are leading this rise are people between the ages of 30 and 60, well outside of the communities currently deemed high risk. Thankfully, the FDA approved a vaccine in 2023 that protects against the original 4 types of the virus plus meningitis B, meaning that patients only need one shot to be protected against all of these strains. Kaslop Petracco encourages everyone to ask their doctor if they need extra protection based on their behaviors.
The big issue for us is to educate the public what the behaviors are that cause folks to be at risk, whether you're a young child, a late adolescent, or an older person. What are the behaviors that are going to put you at risk? And then that's the time to start asking your provider about which vaccines you should really be getting. And again, if you're asking these questions, if I had somebody coming to me and saying, I'm in my 30s, but I'm going to parties and we're sharing joints, and I'm like, oh, well, okay, well then how about you consider getting meningitis vaccine? Because when you share saliva with others, you put yourself at risk for developing meningitis.
Immediate action needs to be taken once you're infected with the disease. However, since many of the symptoms can seem mild at first, some people dismiss it as a cold and put themselves in a potentially deadly situation.
We really don't know which strain of meningitis we're dealing with until they start doing cultures in a medical setting. The problem with meningitis is it starts out with these vague symptoms: a headache, maybe some general body aches and pains, a fever. But the problem with these 5 strains is they can progress to the more serious symptoms of what we call, they can get little bruising spots, especially close to the ankles or the wrists, which we call petechiae, that then spread to the other parts of the body. And it also can lead to loss of consciousness or mental confusion very, very quickly. You can die from one of these forms of meningitis in 24 hours or less.
It can seem silly or dramatic to go to the doctor for a fever and body aches, but Kaslov Petracco says it could save a life. At a minimum, calling up your physician and explaining the symptoms could help narrow down the possibility of the illness being meningitis.
It's rare, but it's not rare if it affects your child. So the thing is to be asking questions of providers, keeping a close eye on your child. Don't just blow it. Oh, they just have a little fever and a temperature, because they could be dead in 24 hours. So again, call the provider, ask questions, keep an eye on them. If they're sick, don't just, put them to bed and forget about them until the next morning. Go in and check on them.
Even the most informed parent can miss the signs. To help increase awareness, Wukovitz created the Kimberly Coffee Foundation and the American Society for Meningitis Prevention.
I realized that if I didn't know my daughter wasn't fully protected against meningococcal meningitis with just one vaccine, and I was a nurse, how many other parents didn't know about this? And that's when I said, I've got a lot of work to do. I've got to educate about this disease, and I've got to educate about the symptoms and how it's transmitted and how it is best prevented by vaccination.
She set out to educate students, parents, and medical providers. Since the meningitis B vaccine is considered a shared decision, Wukovitz reminds doctors that it's their responsibility to bring this topic to their patients' attention.
And if they don't bring up the conversation about meningitis B vaccination, they're missing the boat. They're not protecting as many of their patients as they can be.
Kaslop Petracco says that physicians aren't purposely leaving this information out. Rather, they already have a lot of material to fit into a short 10-minute appointment window that many topics are often left out. Another issue is that as people get older, the wellness visits become less frequent.
At a well visit, when they're seeing their adolescents, 11 to 12 years old, they have more of a captive audience. Those kids are going more regularly to their pediatrician. At 16 years old, most kids aren't coming back to their pediatrician. They think they're invincible. Nothing will ever happen to me. And if they don't go to their pediatrician, say with, a cold or a sore throat, they're likely going to urgent care, and they're not going to get that vaccination conversation.
Along with the education Wukovitz foundations provide, the Kimberly Coffee Foundation also offers college scholarships to students pursuing a nursing education. It's a tribute to Kimberly and the future she had envisioned for herself.
And I have actually met in my nursing, I have met one of our scholarship recipients who I was taking care of one patient, and she was taking care of the same patient as me. And it was such a surprise. And I got to see Kim's legacy full circle. So that was so amazing for me and so rewarding. And it's just so important. And, telling Kim's story has helped me with my grief, telling her story and the things, talking about her. And so that people know that she was just a typical teenager, just like anybody else. And this could happen to their teenager.
You can find more information about Patty Wukovitz, Mary Kozloff Petracco, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.